For the rest of this PowerPoint, we will spend our time discussing each of the endocrine organs, the hormones they secrete, and the actions of those hormones. To begin, this is a picture of a human body depicting the major organs that produce hormones. You'll notice that many of these organs you wouldn't necessarily consider part of the endocrine system. For instance, the heart, the stomach, the kidneys, you don't typically think of as producing hormones, yet they actually do produce hormones. But we're going to save a lot of those for the end of the PowerPoint. We're going to begin with the major organs that produce most of the hormones and therefore are placed into the endocrine system, whereas other organs often participate in other systems but also produce hormones. We begin up near the brain. The brain has three major organs that produce hormones: the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the pineal gland. If you recall, you learned anatomy of the brain in A&P 1. But we're going to focus on this central area here. The area here under the arrow is known as the hypothalamus. When we expand on that region, it is shown here. Attached to the hypothalamus is the pituitary gland. Those two have a physical relationship in that the pituitary gland is attached to the hypothalamus, but also a very important functional relationship, in that the hypothalamus will control the pituitary gland. Also, it will ship down a couple hormones to the pituitary gland. The third region of the brain that produces hormones projects posteriorly and is known as the pineal gland. So looking at the brain, we need to be able to identify the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the pineal gland. Moving down, the neck contains two endocrine organs. One is the larger thyroid gland, and then within the thyroid gland, there are four small glands known as the parathyroid glands. They are typically best viewed posteriorly. So what we have here is a posterior view of the neck showing the larger thyroid gland and embedded inside the four parathyroid glands. Moving down into the chest, we see that there's an organ sitting atop the heart known as the thymus. The thymus participates in the immune system, but it also produces hormones. Then we can move down into the abdomen, and shown posterior to the stomach is the pancreas. Pancreas is a very large gland. It contains a region known as the head, the body, and then the tail. So located here behind the stomach is the pancreas. The adrenal glands sit atop each kidney. So you'll notice a kidney here with an adrenal gland on top, and a kidney here with an adrenal gland on top. Finally, we have the ovaries and testes. And obviously those organs are typically covered in the reproductive system, but they also produce a number of hormones. So you first be able to identify the organs on a drawing such as this or from your study guide. Then we want to go down each of these organs and learn the hormones they produce. The endocrine system always begins with the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. What we have here is now a more detailed view of these two organs. So hypothalamus, projecting from the hypothalamus is the pituitary gland. The structure that attaches the pituitary to the hypothalamus is known as the infundibulum. Infundibulum means funnel. in that there are hormones that get funneled down to the pituitary gland. There is also blood flow that goes from the hypothalamus down to the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus and pituitary gland work together to control other endocrine glands. They are connected by the infundibulum. Other things to point out on this drawing is that the pituitary gland is actually two completely separate glands. There is the posterior pituitary gland and the anterior pituitary gland. We need to cover these two glands completely separately because they work independent from one another. In fact, the anterior pituitary gland is more like a gland in that it synthesizes 7 hormones. The posterior pituitary is actually mostly nervous tissue in that there are neurons that originate in the hypothalamus and extend down into the posterior pituitary gland. It's from these neurons that hormones are released into the bloodstream. So let's learn the hormones of the anterior pituitary gland. I want to first preface that the hypothalamus produces a number of hormones that are going to control the release of these hormones from the anterior pituitary. So the hypothalamus will produce a hormone that will then tell the anterior pituitary to produce one of these hormones. The first hormone we learn is called human growth hormone. As the name suggests, this hormone has a lot to do with growth. It does this by stimulating the liver, muscle, cartilage, bone, and other tissues to synthesize and secrete growth factors. These growth factors are known as insulin-like growth factors. It is then these growth factors that promote growth of the body, protein synthesis, tissue repair, lipolysis, which is breaking down of fat, and elevation of blood glucose levels. All these functions involve growth. In fact, if there is a deficiency in the production of human growth hormone, that will cause a condition known as pituitary dwarfism. If there's an overproduction of human growth hormone, that causes a condition known as giantism or acromegaly. So human growth hormone promotes growth. It does this primarily through targeting the liver, but then the liver produces growth factors. The next hormone is called thyroid stimulating hormone. This hormone tells you what it does. It stimulates the thyroid gland. So it stimulates synthesis and secretion of thyroid hormones by the thyroid gland. This is an instance where you have the hypothalamus that produces a hormone called TRH. TRH stands for thyrotropin releasing hormone. That hormone will then go down to the anterior pituitary to stimulate the production of TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. That then goes to the thyroid gland to stimulate the production of T3 and T4. This is a very common theme between the hypothalamus and pituitary, in that there are hormones facilitating the production of another hormone that facilitates the production of another hormone. In fact, there's a name we give to hormones that stimulate other hormone production, and that is tropic hormones. So the hypothalamus produces a number of hormones we consider tropic, in that they control and stimulate the anterior pituitary. So these are the first two hormones produced by the anterior pituitary gland. in the next video, we will continue with more hormones produced by the anterior pituitary.